In a busy scene, a young man is confronted by a striking pink-haired girl named Zaitan Chu, who questions why he is there. Meanwhile, her companions are calling her towards a nearby cafe. The young man, Qin Li, is the target of Zaitan Chu's sharp words. He is told to stop standing around and to open the car door quickly. Her backpack is shoved into his hands, and he is scolded for being what she sees as a year-long financial burden on her family. It is suggested to him that he find another job, and he is also told that next time the car should be parked somewhere less noticeable, away from the eyes of their friends. The man stays silent while listening to her words. After Zaitan finishes speaking, she gets into the car and complains about her sister's choice of husband, who is the man. Despite her words, the man stays quiet, starts the car, and drives quickly toward the Chu family's home. Soon, they reach their destination, a large, elegant mansion with several floors. Inside, a man named Manga and a woman are sitting at a tea table, drinking tea. He is thinking about how his life could have been different if he had made other choices in the past. He asks when the woman's daughter will arrive, and the woman replies that her daughter is still working at her job, so she's not sure when she'll get there. This woman is a childhood friend of the man's wife, and there's a hint of disappointment in her voice when she thinks they might not see her. The man then wonders about her fiancé, having heard that he rarely leaves the house. He expresses a wish to meet him, curious about what kind of man could capture the interest of such a beautiful woman. He finds it strange that she even brought her fiancé to her mother's house, as that's not something she usually does. After some time, the man and his companion get back to the house. The girl's mother calls from the second floor, asking him to come downstairs, noting how he usually heads straight to his room as soon as he gets home. The girl adds her voice too, urging him to hurry. It's clear there's some tension in the way she speaks to him. Later, she decides to investigate further, approaching his room cautiously. She gently pushes the door ajar and asks if he now thinks of this place as his home or if he just acts like he owns it. The room is dimly lit, cloaked in darkness. Peeking through the crack in the door, she sees him sitting in his underwear, deep in meditation. Frozen for a moment, she quickly pulls back and runs off, letting out a shriek about seeing him undressed. Definitely not what she wanted to see. Meanwhile, Qin Li stays focused in his meditation, his eyes wide open, fully aware of everything around him. A shimmering blue energy dances in the air, and at one point, he opens his eyes. Between his palms, a swirling mass of plasma flickers, reflecting on the past 10 years. His thoughts fill with a sense of triumph. He finally succeeded. It feels like he spent an eternity working toward this moment, but as he parts his lips to speak, only a series of barks escape his throat. The realization hits him. He hasn't spoken a single word in a decade. His jaw and vocal cords have grown stiff, making even the simplest sounds feel strange and unfamiliar. It's a bizarre feeling, and he knows he'll have to retrain himself to speak. Afterward, hearing his mother-in-law's urgent calls from downstairs, Qin Li hurriedly dresses and leaves the room. At the same time, we see the very plant next to where Qin Li underwent his transformation, now lush with greenery and blossoms. The girl's mother begins a tirade, accusing him of pretending not to hear and questioning his strange behavior. Beside her, the childhood friend of his wife stands with a smirk, clearly unimpressed by the whole scene. Unbothered, Qin Li boldly speaks up, showing no admiration for what the girl had discovered earlier. The childhood friend steps forward and extends his hand to Qin Li, introducing himself with a steady gaze. As Qin Li meets his eyes, the man leans in, whispering that he's heard rumors about Qin Li being mute. He also knows Qin Li had asked to stay at the house. With a confident tone, he calls Qin Li an enigma, claiming he's familiar with such characters. Then he issues a warning, telling Qin Li not to try any tricks, boasting that he's sharp enough to see through any deception. Adding more insult, he implies that Qin Li's proposal to the girl was driven purely by material gain, making him unworthy of her. Throughout this verbal attack, Qin Li remains silent, listening to every word. Finally, the man smugly offers 10,000 to speed up Kingsley's departure. But then, Kingsley grips his hand with such force that the man lets out a scream, his smile twisting into pain. Afterward, Kingsley calmly introduces himself, and both his wife's sister and mother-in-law are stunned. They had believed him to be mute, but here he was, speaking clearly. The other man, equally shocked, demands to know why Kingsley had pretended to be silent when he could speak all along. This situation becomes even more troubling as Kingsley tightens his grip on the man's hand, causing him to cry out in pain again. His mother-in-law quickly steps in, urging Kingsley to let go and end the ordeal. Just then, the girl's phone rings, and she answers with a frustrated tone, only to find out it's the police. They inform her that her sister has been arrested. Kingsley's demeanor shifts instantly, his concern evident as he asks about the situation. The girl explains that her sister is facing issues at work, which led to her being taken into custody. Kingsley's emotions churn with worry and frustration. Without a word, he turns on his heel and storms out. His mother-in-law watches him leave and asks where he's going, suspecting he might be running away from his wife's problems. Meanwhile, another person present questions the girl about Kingsley's sudden departure. She explains that there have been challenges at her workplace, with the police surrounding her office and demanding the arrest of a specific individual. The man reassures her, stating that their family's wealth and connections will quickly resolve the situation and offer help. It's clear the woman has a fondness for him, judging by her behavior. The chaos intensifies as the events are relayed to the Eagle Company's jurisdiction. Suddenly, a fiery-haired woman loudly proclaims that everyone involved will face jail time today. The crowd turns to her, taken aback by the severe allergic reactions visible on her face. She demands millions in compensation for damages and blames the company, further escalating the already tense situation. Kingsley enters the scene, cutting a striking figure. She stands tall, her long purple hair flowing around her as she moves closer to assess the situation. Among the crowd, her sharp eyes catch sight of her mother. With a slight smirk, she remarks that any girl demanding millions must have hit her head, though the injury doesn't seem too serious. Next, there's her childhood friend, a guy who confidently points out that thousands, if not tens of thousands, of women use the company's cosmetics without any issues. So the problem likely isn't with the products. Flashing a grin, he mentions that the city's police chief is an old friend of his, implying that the girl won't have an easy time pushing her claims. Unfazed, the girl with allies reveals her identity, casually dropping the fact that the city mayor is her close relative. Competing with her suddenly seems like an impossible task. The guy, caught off guard along with everyone else, quickly changes his approach, distancing himself from the company entirely. He even goes as far as acknowledging the girl's plight, suggesting that the company might owe her compensation. Before he could continue, Kingsley steps into the scene calmly. He approaches the girl with allergies, asking for just 10 minutes to fix the situation. With confidence, he promises that in that short time, he can restore her face to its former beauty, ensuring there will be no further complaints. Meanwhile, his wife watches in shock, still reeling from the fact that he is speaking. Until now, she had believed him to be mute, and hearing him articulate such clear, rational thoughts left her utterly stunned. To say she was taken aback would be an understatement. Her childhood friend feels disheartened by Kingsley's sudden arrival and boldness, firmly believing that Kingsley's actions will only bring more disgrace to the family. Kingsley's wife, already stressed by the situation, questions his intentions. With everything going wrong, his antics could make things worse. Kingsley calmly reassures her, stating that she doesn't need to worry anymore because he has changed. He declares that from now on he will embody true masculinity. His adversary, however, smirks in disbelief, unimpressed by Kingsley's newfound confidence. To him, words don't define manhood, and he believes Kingsley is still the same despicable person he always was. Others in the room are equally shocked by Kingsley's ability to speak. Many who knew him thought he was incapable of speech, some even regarding him as worthless, perhaps a mere pawn of the Chu family. Undeterred, Kingsley approaches the red-haired girl with blemishes on her face and confidently tells her that he can restore her beauty. The girl, however, isn't immediately reassured by his words, admitting that she's reluctant to trust easily. Kingsley, understanding her hesitation, promises that he will take on all the risks and be fully accountable if things don't go as planned. After a moment, the girl nods in agreement. At that moment, Kingsley's wife rushes over, expressing her concerns about the potential harm to her business. Kingsley, leaning in slightly, tells her that the marks on the girl's face are just regular burns. He then asks his wife to fetch something for him. The red-haired girl, still unsure, asks if he's really confident it will work. Kingsley insists it's necessary and reassures her. His wife hurries off to get what he asked for, while his adversary continues to create obstacles, clearly intent on making things difficult. It becomes clear that despite the tension, Kingsley's wife harbors affection for him. His adversary confides that Kingsley will regret it if his plan fails. Later, Kingsley's wife returns with a bag of ingredients he had requested. She hands it over to him, pleading with him not to endanger her family with this risky endeavor. Kingsley reassures his wife that he won't fail. He knows he's alone in this task, with no one to depend on, and that the outcome rests solely on him. Laying the components on the table, he begins weaving his enchantments over them. The onlookers watch intently, their eyes glued to his every move as he carefully works his magic, explaining each step with precision. Finally, he announces that he's finished. What emerges is a concoction that looks like a murky brown sludge with an unpleasant odor. Odor and wisps of steam rise from the bowl. Kingsley instructs the red-haired girl to apply it to her skin, but she cautions him, warning that any adverse reaction would lead to serious consequences. Despite her hesitation, she complies, dipping a single finger into the mixture to apply it. Suddenly, Kingsley intervenes, plunging his whole hand into the mixture and slapping it onto her face, sending droplets flying everywhere. The girl screams in shock and rushes to the bathroom, much to the amusement of someone in the crowd who lets out a chuckle. Kingsley's wife watches with a mix of disappointment and regret in her eyes, while his opponent grins, satisfied that Kingsley may have made a huge mistake. It seems like everything has gone wrong, until a piercing scream echoes from the women's restroom. Moments later, the same red-haired girl steps out, her skin flawless and radiant, her beauty restored beyond anyone's expectations. Everyone stands in disbelief, none more so than Kingsley's wife's childhood friend, who hurriedly approaches him, eager to know how he pulled off such a miraculous feat. Kingsley, calm and collected, explains that he had studied pharmacodynamics long ago, which gave him the expertise to make this happen. Intrigued, the red-haired girl approaches Kingsley, asking if he could help her with other ailments. Kingsley nods, suggesting he can assist but emphasizes the need for an examination first. She mentions her wealthy uncle and promises generous gratitude if he can help him. Kingsley agrees, and his wife, listening intently, struggles to understand the situation. She questions Kingsley's sanity, but he brushes it off with a smile, not taking her words to heart. Kingsley's wife tries to dissuade him, pointing out that he isn't a doctor. Treating someone's ailment is one thing, but offering comprehensive treatment is another matter. Kingsley reassures her, telling her not to fret too much. However, the girl begins to grow irritated, accusing him of having an inflated sense of self. She warns that the man might be seriously ill, and there might not be a cure, posing several challenges. Despite his wife's efforts, Kingsley disregards her plea and starts to leave. She tries once more to persuade him, but her attempts prove futile as he departs. He asserts his autonomy and decision, assuring her that his departure poses no threat to her or her family. The scene then shifts to a doctor, who highlights a man's evident distress. He inquires if there is any solution to the issue at hand. The doctor grimly informs him that the mayor's father's condition is worsening rapidly, surpassing their earlier prognosis. Just then, The fiery-haired beauty approaches and Kingsley falls into step beside her. She greets everyone and asks about her uncle's well-being. Upon learning of his deteriorating state, she visibly recoils in shock. Swiftly, she transitions to a solution-oriented mindset, mentioning that she encountered an Oriental medicine specialist earlier who might be able to assist them. The man scrutinizes Kingsley from head to toe, expressing surprise at his claim of being a doctor. The protagonist confirms he is indeed a doctor, but the mayor questions whether he has looked at himself in the mirror, noting that he appears too young. The mayor then requests to see Kingsley's license. Kingsley admits he doesn't have any documentation, which prompts the man to erupt in anger, accusing the girl of bullying him and asserting he won't trust his father's health to a charlatan. The girl apologizes to Kingsley for having to endure the outburst and suggests that he might need to leave. Suddenly, a nurse bursts into the room, urgently calling for assistance and signaling a patient in critical condition. Concern spreads through the corridor as they enter the ward. Kingsley trails behind the young woman and her companion. Inside, a man lies on a stretcher surrounded by medical staff. The mayor implores the doctor to intervene, but in a helpless tone, the doctor conveys the limitations of their abilities in this dire situation. The young woman rushes closer to her companion, seeking solace. She reminds her that she didn't come here alone and that Kingsley can help. However, the mayor doesn't take her words seriously, stating that if a qualified doctor, considered the best in the city, failed, then there's nothing Kingsley can do. Kingsley interjects, asserting that it is possible to help, but there's no need to waste time deliberating. All he hears in response is a demand to get out. Undeterred, Kingsley decides he needs to approach from a different angle. He offers the mayor a deal. If he can help Mr. Johnson, the mayor will issue an apology. If he fails, he could face imprisonment on charges of deception. The mayor erupts in anger, accusing Kingsley of dictating terms. Despite this, the woman insists that Kingsley should probably leave. Kingsley acquiesces, but just as he's about to exit the room, he remarks that he could have assisted Mr. Johnson, leaving them to ponder his words. Outside the ward, his wife waits for him, having evidently trailed him there. She inquires about his satisfaction with the situation and warns him against lingering, advising him to depart swiftly before he attracts serious adversaries. As Kingsley quietly tails her, he is suddenly jolted by a scream emanating from the ward. The ailing man begins to convulse, sending his son into a frenzy. Panic and cries fill the air, while the perplexed doctors struggle to understand the nature of the man's condition. The physician urgently directs a nurse to fetch a pacemaker. Then, the familiar flatline appears on the monitor, accompanied by the heavy silence that follows when the heart ceases its rhythm. The doctor expresses regret, conceding their powerlessness in the face of this tragic situation as the man's heart stops beating. The mayor inquires of the doctor about the cause of the sudden change, noting that just moments before, while the patient's condition was dire, everything had seemed relatively stable. The doctor responds with a somber tone, suggesting that this outcome was inevitable. He emphasizes that there's no need for self-reproach and that acceptance of the situation is key. Such occurrences are part and parcel of life's unpredictability. The man's son rushes to his father's side on the couch, tears streaming down his face as he expresses feelings of unworthiness of his father's love. Just then, the door to the ward bursts open, and Qin Li strides into the room, commanding everyone to clear a path. His determination to save the old man is palpable as he approaches the patient, whose heart has just stopped beating. Placing his hand on the man's chest, Qin Li focuses his energy, creating a visible aura around him. The mayor's skepticism begins to wane as he witnesses a faint bluish glow enveloping Qin Li, a sight truly out of the ordinary. With precision, Qin Li retrieves a specialized needle and methodically inserts it into the man's chest, following up with several more needles, all aimed at the same vital point. It is revealed that a decade prior, a wandering monk had imparted ancient medicinal knowledge to Qin Li, unlocking these remarkable abilities. In exchange for this treatment, silence was his payment, for 10 long years. He honored this commitment, and as a result he now possesses extraordinary skills. Inserting another needle into the man's neck prompts sudden convulsions and coughing. The onlookers are stunned. Just moments earlier, the man's heart had ceased beating, and he was nearly deceased. Yet now he begins to cough, and his heart pulses once more. Leaning over the couch, Qin Li takes a deep breath and exhales slowly, remarking that he has managed to intervene just in the nick of time. A bit more delay, and it would have been too late. The doctor stands in shock, taken aback by what he has witnessed. Naturally, he had placed his faith solely in the science of medicine and struggled to regard such matters seriously. The man reclining on the couch begins to stir, lifting himself slightly from the bed. His loved ones erupt in joy, inquiring about his well-being. The girl expresses her deep concern for her uncle, and he gently pats her cheek, acknowledging his folly and urging her not to be angry with him. Qin Li lingers for a few moments, realizing his outsider status amidst the family celebration of their cherished one. As he makes his departure, a sudden sound catches his attention from behind. One is calling his name. Turning swiftly, he finds the mayor kneeling before him. The mayor offers an apology for his previous conduct, acknowledging his inappropriate behavior. Qin Li reassures him, suggesting not to take things too personally and expressing his willingness to assist. He expresses relief at the man's healing and recovery. The red-haired woman also seeks forgiveness from Qin Li and then requests his account details to transfer $500,000 as a token of gratitude for his remarkable intervention. Qin Li exits the room, leaving the group inside to marvel at his expertise. Their voices carry into the corridor, filled with admiration and disbelief. His wife, wearing a discontented expression, remarked on his high demand that day. She expressed her belief that he preferred not to interfere in others' affairs, which took Qin Li back. After all, he had just saved a man's life, literally bringing him back from the brink of death. Meanwhile, around the corner, the childhood friend of Qin Li's wife seethes with anger at his increasing success, clearly intent on stirring up trouble. The scene shifted to the Chu family home, where Qin Li's mother engaged in conversation with his wife, inquiring about her well-being. The wife reassured her that everything was under control, urging her not to fret. Qin Li lingered momentarily before heading toward his room, observing the interaction. His mother-in-law, noticing his presence, instructed him to carry on with his usual chores and not to loiter. The wife, feeling exhausted, mentioned that she could barely stand and intended to retreat to her room for some rest. Complying with the instructions, Qin Li began his cleaning tasks. After completing them, he entered his wife's room to inform her of his progress. To his surprise, he found a young woman in a short, sheer nightgown practicing yoga. It was an unexpected sight that momentarily intrigued him, but he quickly averted his gaze, feeling the heat of embarrassment rise to his cheeks. The young woman noticed him and mentioned that her sister had warned her about someone engaging in inappropriate behavior in the room earlier. Qin Li explained that there had been a misunderstanding. He had merely offered her a ride home from school, changed his clothes upon returning, and accidentally left the door unlocked, allowing her to enter without knocking. Qin Li felt a mix of awkwardness and urgency, eager to clear the misunderstanding while trying to maintain a respectful distance. The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension, a blend of embarrassment and the awkwardness of the situation. The girl inquired if Qin Li was being truthful. She maintained a series of intriguing yoga poses, fully aware of her short nightgown. He hesitated briefly but ultimately affirmed his honesty. The girl grinned, expressing her trust, citing her sister's notorious temper as assurance that Qin Li wouldn't flirt with her. She later commended him for handling all the day's challenges, declaring him a true gentleman and remarking on his remarkable luck in overcoming every obstacle. Qin Li found himself at a loss for words. The girl initiated a conversation, mentioning plans for a quiet family evening and subtly implying that he was expected to accompany her. Absorbing her words, he pondered for a moment and then agreed. As he prepared to exit the room, the girl collapsed onto the bed, expressing exhaustion and a desire for rest before drifting off to sleep. She thanked him when he inquired why, but received no response. She had already succumbed to slumber. The scene unfolded the following evening as everyone gathered around the table, sharing laughter and engaging in various conversations. A waitress hurried between them, filling glasses with wine. Qin Li took a sip, casting a scrutinizing gaze at one of his relatives, mentally noting to compliment their attire while recognizing the subtle scheming beneath the surface. Soon after, the same relative tactlessly inquired about Qin Li's wife's plans for starting a family. Leaving the young woman visibly flustered, she responded, explaining that they hadn't yet considered such a significant step and felt no rush to do so. However, a family member interjected, insisting they shouldn't postpone such an important matter as time swiftly passes. The conversation took a turn as she shifted her praise to another family member, her son, commending him for his harmonious relationship with his wife, unlike some others in the family. The son playfully chided his mother for laying it on thick, though his impudent smile hinted at his enjoyment of the praise. Subsequently, the conversation revolved around him, with everyone eagerly discussing his life and accomplishments, momentarily diverting attention from the sensitive topic at hand. It emerged that the son held a prominent position, prompting everyone to extol his virtues, occasionally drawing comparisons with the main character, sometimes subtly and other times more overtly. The cherry on top was when this gentleman presented a special gift to the head of the household. He produced a petite crimson box and approached the man with it. Upon opening it, the recipient's expression clearly reflected his admiration for the contents nestled inside, a delicate porcelain bowl dating back to the Yuan dynasty. The gentleman mentioned that he had caught wind of the head of the household's appreciation for fine porcelain, which led him to acquire this bowl for a staggering 30,000. He further remarked that when it comes to honoring good people and crafting meaningful gifts, he doesn't hesitate to invest such a sum. For the next 10 minutes, the room buzzed with chatter about the lavishness of the gift and the commendable character of the giver. Qin Li observed quietly, his thoughts diverging sharply from the general sentiment. To him, Chang Hang's penchant for extravagance seemed frivolous. He regarded the bowl as utterly devoid of value, finding the 30,000 price tag absurd. Activating his mystical vision, Qin Li discerned that the item was nothing more than a meticulously crafted replica. Chang Hang turned to him, extending an invitation to inspect the bowl. Seizing the opportunity, Qin Li inquired if he could identify its true nature. Chang Hang then proceeded to openly insult him, boasting without restraint. The final straw came when Chang Hang audaciously offered to assist the protagonist in securing a job as a janitor. Following this, Qin Li's wife could no longer contain her frustration. She forcefully banged her glass on the table, causing few drops of wine to splatter onto the tablecloth. "Enough of this circus," she demanded, reminding everyone present that Qin Li was also a member of the family, deserving of respect and free from insult. Chang Hang retorted that Qin Li had arrived empty-handed, which prompted the protagonist to rise to his feet. "I admit that I came empty-handed today," he began, aware that the relative still remained oblivious to Qin Li's ability to speak. Thus, their astonishment was palpable. Simultaneously, Chang Hang's wife remarked that he was still a scoundrel, albeit now a vocal one. Qin Li shrugged off the insults, stating that they held no sway over the fact that they had been lavishing praise on a counterfeit for over 10 minutes. The room fell silent as the realization began to dawn on those present, creating an uncomfortable atmosphere as they grappled with the implications of their misplaced admiration. These words stoked the ire of the relatives, and Chang Hang, recalling that he had paid 30,000 rubles for the bowl, vehemently denied any possibility of it being fake. "You can't just call it nonsense after I paid that much," he shouted, his voice rising. Qin Li retorted, "Forking over 30,000 for nonsense is sheer foolishness. That's hardly something to boast about." Fury boiled over at the remark, his hands crashing down onto the table with such force that dishes and cutlery scattered in all directions. Qin Li stood firm, vowing to substantiate his claim. "I'm not one to merely talk the talk," he asserted, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. However, the head of the household stepped in, putting an end to the spectacle. "Enough, protagonist. Hold your tongue," he commanded, his authority attempting to restore order. The rest of the room, including Qin Li's spouse, voiced their discontent. His wife defended her son-in-law, asserting his noble intentions, and insisting that even if he had been duped, it bore no significance in the grand scheme of things. Suddenly, an unexpected visitor entered the establishment, none other than the mayor, accompanied by a friend. Word had spread about the forgery, prompting the mayor's curiosity. His presence took everyone by surprise, and the protagonist's son-in-law hurriedly approached, ingratiating himself before the mayor and offering to introduce him to the other guests. However, the mayor diverted his attention, moving toward the protagonist. "Thank you truly," he expressed with sincere gratitude. "I cannot adequately convey my appreciation." Qin Li dismissed any further discussion, asserting, "There are no outstanding debts among us." His son-in-law was taken aback, questioning if there was a misunderstanding. He attempted to convey Qin Li's unsavory character, but the mayor reacted strongly. "The true scoundrel here is Qin Wang," he declared, turning his focus back to Qin Li. The protagonist shrugged it off, stating, "They're merely my wife's relatives. There's nothing more to discuss." He gestured toward the ancient bowl, the source of their disagreement, its presence looming large in the conversation. It was as if the bowl itself had become a battleground for pride and reputation, and all eyes fell upon it, awaiting the next move in this escalating drama. The mayor confidently declared the bowl as not being from the Un dynasty. Fortunately, he had someone knowledgeable by his side, an expert who specialized in artifacts from this era. He requested the expert to examine the bowl, knowing that porcelain and pottery were their forte. As the inspection commenced, the expert examined the artifact closely and opined that the bowl appeared authentic, much to the delight of Chang Hang. However, Qin Li, seeking certainty, questioned the expert's confidence in its genuineness, provoking a hint of annoyance in response. "I stand firm in my belief that it's not real," Qin Li declared, his tone unwavering. The expert, attempting to maintain his composure, patted Chang Hang on the shoulder and remarked, "Now I understand what you find so appealing about this individual." But the expert quickly pointed out unequivocally that it was indeed a forgery. "There's always a small stamp from that era," he explained, peering closely at the bowl. "Moreover, the patterns were exclusively applied by hand back then, a detail you can observe in true pieces." He gestured to the bowl, stating, "This particular item is an unmistakable counterfeit, albeit of decent quality. It was likely tossed into a tomb." He then mentioned that such items often bore a mark of death, which he managed to locate on this piece. The atmosphere shifted as the guests grew louder, tension rising in the room. Chang Hang's mother erupted in a tirade directed at him, but he attempted to diffuse the tension, his frustration evident. The expert, sensing the shift in mood, warmly embraced Qin Li, praising his keen eye for recognizing the replica amidst the high-quality antiquated craft. "Your perception is astute," he commended. The mayor, eager to seize this serendipitous encounter, offered his hospitality, expressing it as an honor to engage in conversation with Qin Li. "I would be delighted to dine with you," he said, extending the invitation. Unable to let such an opportunity slip by, Qin Li informed his wife's relatives that he had an engagement with the mayor for dinner and would return promptly. Their reaction was one of astonishment. Many perceived him as lacking stature, and the women began to question the image they had formed of him. Left alone with his thoughts, Qin Li brooded over the concerns of the world. A fellow guest confided in him, revealing that another wave of misfortune had befallen their family. "Both my family and I are deteriorating," he said, his voice heavy with worry. Despite undergoing extensive medical examinations and tests that show no apparent cause for our declining health. Curious, Qin Li inquired if he could assess the man's pulse. The man consented, and Qin Li placed his hand on the man's wrist, focusing intently. After a moment of contemplation, he appeared deep in thought. "What do you find?" the man asked, his curiosity piqued. Qin Li explained after your family dinner, "You ought to prioritize a visit to the mayor. It would be wise to adjust any existing plans accordingly." Expressing gratitude, the man indicated his intention to await Qin Li's return at his residence,